We have made our way in our readings over the last few Sundays through St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, and we find ourselves at a high point, the love chapter, chapter 13. And as a backdrop for our entering into this chapter today, I'd like to tell you a little story I read. It's a poem story by Lord Byron, that famous bad boy of Victorian literature. And the story is about this nobleman. His name is Manfred, who has a castle tucked into the deepest heart of the Alps, and there he dwelt alone with a servant, and his pastime was roaming the Alps, walking over the glaciers in the howling wind, and in the hidden ravines of the Alps, and he lived all alone. Well, the story begins with him in his castle in a Gothic hall. And there, because he's somewhat of a magician, he summoned the spirits of nature to him. The spirit of the night, the spirit of the wind, the spirit of the mountain, the spirit of the ocean. And they all come to him and they say, Manfred, what do you want? Why did you summon us? And do you know what he said? Forgetfulness. He wanted forgetfulness. And that begs the question, what does he want to forget? What are his regrets? Well, later on, he runs into the witch of the Alps, and she is able to get it out of him. And he confesses that he killed his lover. But how did he do that? Well, by breaking her heart. You see, she got a glimpse into his autonomous heart, a heart that really had no room for loving. And her heart withered, and as she bled out, he didn't do anything about it. And then later in the story, he summons up Ashtart. Ashtart is actually the Old Testament fertility goddess of love who led Israel astray. And she comes before him. And he asks her, Ashtart, am I forgiven? She just says, farewell. Ashtart, Ashtart, do you love me? And she merely said his name, Manfred, as if, what a bizarre question to ask me. Now, why did I tell you this story? Well, because we see two things here in conflict in Manfred, and I think it's the two things that are in conflict in us. We all were made for love. We all want love. We want to be loved and to love. Yet, there's this competing thing in us, especially in our culture since the Enlightenment, which sets us up with a prior commitment. And that prior commitment is autonomy, self-governance. I don't want to be bothered with anybody else because I want my freedom. And that is the epitome of Manfred. And when death comes to take him to hell, he goes without any feeling at all because he got what he wants, and that's his own will, his own sovereign will. Now, this takes us to the love chapter. And the context for the love chapter is spiritual gifts. They had a marvelous problem in Corinth, and that is the Spirit of God was so powerful in this congregation, and everybody was so excited about what they found that they could do. They were just living with all these wonderful spiritual gifts. And it became a circus. The truth of the matter is we can live as autonomous beings and still have and possess spiritual gifts. And so Paul says, hey, listen, there's a better way to do this. Seek that which is better. And what's better? Charity, love. And he says, even if I had the gift of tongues, of men and of angels, wouldn't you like that? I would love to have the gift of human languages. I would love to go to France and just parlez-vous with them, wouldn't you? Or go to Germany and sprechen Deutsch with them. And go to Italy and go all over and just, wow, to enter into their cultures and be able to speak with them fluently. I wish I could do that. I can't do that. What a gift, though, that would be. And a gift of tongues of angels. What would that be like? Really? To have that gift of angel language, that means you could talk with angels. Who here wouldn't want to talk with angels? I mean, it's a little bit like Manfred, but he just talked with the wrong crowd, okay? But it can be such a thing of autonomy and say, look at me, these are spectacular things. And he's saying, even if I could speak with the tongue of men and of angels, I become like a clanging gong or cymbals. A Greek word there, kymbale, is the same word for the Sibyl, the fertility goddess of the Hellenistic world, who these ladies would go with clashing cymbals and castanets and out and making a whole lot of noise to attract the simple-minded. That's what you're like. If you have this tongue, it's nothing. And if I had the gift of prophecy, I would like that, wouldn't you? To be able to look into the future and to determine what's happening. Or if I have all knowledge and know all mysteries. And if I have all faith, and this is really cool, isn't it? So I could move mountains, right? Wow. I'd love to be there, Mount Rushmore. Wow. Look at me. That's a lot like Manfred, isn't it? Yeah. Or what if I gave everything that I have to feed the poor, and even I let my body be burned? One of the most shocking things I remember living up back in the 60s was this monk who actually doused himself with gasoline and he lit himself on fire. And it is even said that back in the first century, someone actually did that. And it made a big impression on them back then, as it did for me in the 60s. If you do all this stuff, it's nothing. So Paul's saying, these spiritual gifts are great, but we tend to look to the spectacular and it can become a circus. But love is not like that. Love is patient. What is the opposite of patience? It's impatience. And what's behind impatience? It's our autonomy. Our autonomy is bumping up against somebody else, and somebody else is bugging my autonomy, so I become impatient. Kind. What's the opposite of kindness? It's unkindness. And what's behind that? Autonomy, my own will, my own self. Love's not jealous. It's not arrogant or seek heirs. Well, what's arrogance all about? Again, it's all about my autonomy. Look at me. Does not seek its own. Well, seeking your own is the very definition of self-government, of what Manfred was all about. Now, as we progress through the chapter, we see that now abides faith, hope, and love. But love is greater than faith and hope. Why is that? Because faith and hope just belong to this age, and it goes. It's part of this age. But love belongs not only to this age, but the next age. And everything we do in loving, that is using our wills in the correct way. That is willing to self-gift ourselves to those around us. And when we do this, instead of losing who we are, we become and we enter into who we are. And we become ourselves. We grow in ourselves. And we become happy. And we're full of love. It's such a great thing to be in love. Every one of us should just be head over heels in love. And we can take that with us. Manfred took his will with him to hell. We will ourselves by self-gifting ourselves to God, and we take it all to heaven. There was a man who lived at the time of Byron who walked the streets of London. His name was William Blake. He was a great artist and a great poet. And everybody thought he was crazy, but the truth of the matter is he may have been the only sane person in the city at that time. And this is what he said. He said, "We are here on this earth just for a short time to bear the beams of love." To bear the beams of love. And he's making a pun on the word beam. A beam can mean a number of things. It could mean these heavy beams that keep this church up. They are very obviously hard to bear. And loving is a lot like that sometimes, isn't it? It's self-gifting yourself when you don't feel like it. And it's a heavy burden. But beam can also mean a beam of light. And it's the beam of God's light that when we love and our eyes grow accustomed to the light of God, we bear the light beams of God's glory in this life. So, dear brothers and sisters, the challenge for us is this. There are those in our lives today, aren't there, that we need to love by self-gifting ourselves, by an act of the will, setting our will aside. God is calling us to that today. He's challenging us because That is exactly what Jesus Christ did for us. He self-gifted himself to us. Let us self-gift ourselves to him, to his kingdom, and your family, friends, and neighbors this week.